And welcome. This is a pleasure to be able to talk to all of you about sleep. We're going to be discussing basically what we would call secondary insomnia, kind of exploring what sleep really is and why we need it. And also things that disrupt our sleep, also how to identify patterns of both hypersomnia and sleeplessness. And finally, supplemental strategies where we look at natural products that can influence, hopefully influence assistively sleep architecture, sleep duration, and also the quality of sleep. Spend a little bit of time talking about sleep hygiene. It's important at this point to really tell you what we're not going to talk about because sleep is an exhaustive topic and it's a complex one. And on the right, you'll see a modified classification of adult insomnia that reflects the National Classification of Sleep Disorders. So you can see it's a very vast topic, as all of you know. But we're not going to be talking today about primary insomnias or sleep-related breathing disorders like snoring and sleep apnea, things like restless leg. We're going to look at the in-depth topic of sleep hygiene. We'll touch on the most basic points. Another very rich area in which you see a tremendous amount of benefit in managing sleep disorders are cognitive therapies, basically focusing on the health relationship and how through, let's say, coaching counseling around sleep issues, you can help people to relax and identify things that keep them up at night and worry them sick, so to speak. So this is an area, as I said, and in future we can also focus on any of these topics more in depth. But for now, it's basically going to be secondary insomnia. And another area that isn't spoken about much, which is hypersomnia, where people just sleep too much. We know we're not sleeping well, and we're a country of people who literally suffer from disturbed sleep. We believe, for the most part, that our view of sleep is distorted. And so we are sleep deprived to the point that abnormal sleep is becoming the norm. So it's very easy to actually miss the diagnosis or even get about questioning a patient in depth about their sleep habits all the times because as clinicians and counselors, we ourselves are running in such a fast track that we're also not getting adequate sleep. The reason we're focusing today on some natural sleep aids is because sleep aid risks are extremely serious. People don't know how to put themselves to sleep. They don't know how to calm down and relax. And so in order to get some sleep, to catch up with that whole sense of sleep deprivation and sleep debt, there's widespread use of over-the-counter and prescription sleep aids. And this slide really designed to focus you on how the FDA is demanding that the manufacturers of the sedative hypnotic type drugs, we're talking about here specifically things like Rosem or Lunesta or Sonata, things Ambien, they're asking these companies to make a much bigger deal about the potential side effects. So look down here under the typical current warnings, you see things like drowsiness and dizziness and lightheadedness and lack of coordination, etc. But the reality of it is the more serious conditions are strong allergic reactions and then things like frenzied night eating where you actually go on eating binges that are just incredibly intense. I would imagine a good example would be for those individuals historically who addicted to marijuana, that overwhelming sense of hunger is the same type of a thing you can get with regard to eating in your relationship to eating in these drugs. The other, which is sleep driving, where people who oftentimes that are vulnerable to actually getting in the car driving, thinking they're awake, but they're actually asleep. So there are these side effects that are downplayed, which would make the butterfly associated with Lunesta and the beaver and Abraham Lincoln associated with Remilton a little bit bizarre in a sense. It's not quite that gentle. Sleeping less, and from 1910 to 2005, we see a dramatic reduction in the number of sleep hours. And as we look at how much sleep we really do need, basically the chart is helpful in focusing you on it. As adults, we typically need between 7 and 10 hours sleep a night. And it's worthwhile to note that those of us, if you're any adolescents listening, and there may be some, the adolescents also need a considerable amount of sleep, more than adults. And oftentimes it's the teens who end up with altered attention, difficulty staying awake in school, because in order to have a social life and in order to just enjoy being alive, they tend to stay up really late, and then they're obligated to get up early for school. So one wonders if we wouldn't be better off having our schools run at night. So maybe adolescents need to start school at 5 in the evening and then end up going to bed at 2 at night. So maybe that's more consistent with the circadian pattern for teenagers. But nonetheless, what you're looking at here is at least a 7 to 9 hour window for adults. And most of us, per the other slide, are on the far side of 7, or the low side of 7, more at the level of 6. We're looking at our short and long sleep duration that's associated with a number of risk factors. So whether you're sleeping too few hours or you're sleeping too many hours, what we call hypersomnia, we see is an increased exposure to stress-related triggers. So those of us who are sleeping less are much more susceptible to not managing stress. Our stress tolerance is reduced dramatically. We all get increases in body weight as measured by body mass index. For those of you who are doing first-line therapy, you see alterations in the body impedance. Also, there's an increased risk to diabetes and heart problems. And as you're looking at the slide, you see increased risk to psychiatric diseases. And where it says in a bit lower ability to pay attention, oftentimes a lot of attention deficit disorder in both adults and kids is actually more a reflection of sleep deficit than it is actually cognitive issues. So when we go through these slides, think about your attention deficit disordered adults and children who may not be sleeping well. Part of the solution to their problem is to actually improve their sleep quality. Another interesting note is that we do have what's called sleep debt, and we used to think that all you needed to do was sleep a number of hours later on more on the following day to make up for the number of hours that you in fact lose the previous night. But basically what new research has pointed out is that it takes about 1 week of sleep to repay a sleep debt that would be linked to 2 to 3 hours per night of loss. So you can stay up one night, burn a candle at both ends, and ultimately to make up for that sleep debt, you would have to literally spend 1 week in repair, which brings up again the issue of poor performance in school, in cardiovascular risk, altered endocrine function, simply because people aren't sleeping enough. When we sleep, we have difficulty reading our hunger signals. So there is a definite association between sleeplessness and increased hunger, especially for carbohydrates. So the idea that you could literally pack on an extra 500 calories a day just by night eating and snacking, which is associated with not sleeping enough, is another thing to consider when dealing with patients that have body composition issues or overweight issues. It becomes very important to deal with sleep patterns and not allow that to be missed. This study is quite interesting, and it was published in Sleep in 2007. This is a 9,000 patient evaluation, and in these 9,000 adults, ages 32 to 86, those individuals sleeping 5 to 6 hours a night and 9 hours or more a night were significantly more likely to get diabetes than those sleeping 7 hours. And 7 hours is the lower rung of the 7 to 9 hours most of us need. So at this point, you might want to just self-reflect and look at yourself and your friends and your family and those of us who are really sleeping in the 5 to 6 hour window, and really ask ourselves whether or not we're setting ourselves up for both unwanted weight gain, all sorts of unnecessary anxiety, perhaps depression, as well as altered body composition and future cardiovascular and diabetic risk, especially if we personally have those risks in our own genetic tree. This article to be particularly interesting with regard to short sleep time and overweight in children and adolescents. This is a little bit more involved in terms of the architecture of sleep, but essentially the takeaway is those individuals that are younger who are sleeping less are much more prone to overweight, and as we mentioned earlier, they're also more prone to eating snack foods and carbohydrate binging. In this slide, you're also looking at more about the relationship to sleep architecture and REM sleep, which we'll talk about in more depth shortly. This another article I thought was interesting because it pertained to too little or too much sleep in childhood depression. And so within this group of children that were studied, you can see a distribution of children that were sleeping too little, sleeping too much, and those that alternated between both. And in this study, basically you saw childhood depression as linked to sleeplessness. Again, thinking about attention deficit disorder, and oftentimes one of the things you'll see in attention deficit issues is you'll see a comorbid anxiety that goes along with the ADHD. Oftentimes a drug like Strattera is used to calm down the anxiety so that it allows a child to focus, maybe sleep better, and have better sociability. So basically, when you're looking at ADHD, there's a whole emotional and sleep component to it that, if it were addressed efficiently, might in fact reduce the attention deficit in school. So you need sleep, what controls sleep. This is basically just a brief review, and obviously needs a lot more time to really review, but just as a quick overview, sleep is mysterious, and the real biochemistry of sleep, its complexity is not clear. But one of the things that I learned from Dr. Jay Lombard over the last 3 years is that sleep is the ultimate anti-inflammatory for the brain and the body. So when you sleep, you know, whether they've demonstrated the exact mechanism, your body does go through a restoration period. And there are other various theories that are examining some of the mechanisms behind sleep, but nonetheless, sleep has an anti-inflammatory effect. Sleep is a circadian rhythm, and the important, I think, takeaway on this slide is that basically when we sleep, we are linked to nature and natural order. We are basically a daytime animal, and our body is tied to the sun going up and the sun going down, and the cycle of day and night. And so when we lose our sync with the Earth's rhythm, then we become out of sync internally. And just being able to get people back into deep, refreshing sleep gives them a sense of connectivity and a sense of continuity with self, with family, with those that are significant to them, with community, and just the larger sense of beauty of just being alive. So sleep is a connection for us to the natural order of life. It goes through the suprachiasmatic nucleus located in the hypothalamus, so it's a light-sensitive organ that when we experience daytime, the hypothalamic process in the SCN turns off the production of melatonin and allows us to wake up. And then as dark approaches, the SCN then turns on, and what occurs, or turns off, and then what occurs is you have production of melatonin and other pineal gland hormones that are also related to just the balancing of mood and behavior are noradrenaline and serotonin, dopamine, etc. And just to make a note is that serotonin is the precursor of melatonin. So when you have disruption in the serotonergic pathway, you can frequently see disruption in the production of melatonin. So this connection between depression and sleeplessness or sleeping too much has a very direct connection to pineal hormones and hypothalamic hormones and other neurologic neurotransmitters that are all interrelated with sleep. Just a view of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is directly involved in the reproduction of our species as well as the sleep cycle, and is involved in the stress response. So this organ of allostasis that houses the pineal is also going to be processing stress triggers. So again, you see sleep directly connected to stressors. So the upregulation of the stress response is also intimately connected to sleep disturbance. So the natural circadian rhythm that we are processing, which is sleep, also ends up becoming part of the process of nighttime alertness and also our defensive posture. So there's this intimate relationship between cortisol and melatonin. So when we're awake during the day, we are on the upswing with cortisol, and when we enter into the evening hours and the sun goes down and we prepare to go to sleep, cortisol declines and melatonin then increases. So when we look at the relationship between the upregulation of the stress response and natural rhythm of melatonin, if we are continuously in a stressed position, then cortisol can continue to be elevated into the evening, and it can actually squash the effect of melatonin. So it isn't uncommon when you do stress adrenal index and you look at the circadian rhythm of cortisol, you will see it's elevated in the PM, which is a major contributor, to sleep disturbances. So sleep is paradoxical. It's both quiet and it's dynamic. Your brain really never shuts off. You have your REM sleep and you have your non-REM sleep. And when you're in REM, basically you're in a hypermetabolic state. It's a cholinergic state. Your brain waves are similar to being awake, and when you're in non-REM, you're offline. It's similar to like literally being autistic. You're literally in a state of vegetation. Your body is in its lowest ebb of inflammation, so things are quiet and things are repairing. In REM, you have your activation and you have your dream time. So just as we move into identifying sleep disturbances, understanding the architecture of sleep is important because the on and off cycle of REM and non-REM is important in appreciating how one moves through the sleep process, and it allows you to begin to think about different nutritional interventions because the different natural strategies interact with different stages of sleep. And so as you go through your 5 stages of sleep, one of the things that occurs is that each of those stages is susceptible to different neurotransmitter imbalances, different levels of stress hormone, and how one moves through those stages is extremely important in understanding when the supplements might be most effective. So in order to connect with the sleep patterns and identifying them, review a way maybe getting to the crux of what might be going on. So when you're looking at sleep duration and quality, these questions that you're going to want to ask, each patient. If a person says they're not sleeping well, then the inquiry process goes through how many hours do you sleep per night, what time do you go to sleep, what time do you wake up, do you sleep through the night, how many times do you wake up, and so this line of questioning allows you to determine whether or not there may be other imbalances going on beside just a problem with the actual sleep architecture itself. For example, if a person is having difficulty falling asleep, for example, maybe that has something to do with their eating pattern. Maybe their blood sugar is not regulated properly. So one of the things that you have an opportunity to do is to, once you find out where there are issues, you can then move through the process of being able to check to see if they're eating on a frequent basis, if their carbohydrate intake is controlled. For example, one of the most key features of a metabolic syndrome type of disorder is snoring and sleep apnea. And while we're not discussing the entire sleep process of sleep apnea, what we do is that by regulating blood sugar, we actually can improve the whole ability to reduce sleep apnea, and snoring is one of the first things that reduces. So, a partner can actually help your patient know if their snoring is changing and the intensity of the snoring is being reduced. There are 9 characteristics of the sleep-wake disturbances that we're discussing, and again, the questions that I had just offered you to use as part of your interview process, which I'm sure you're already doing, it's basically a reminder, is to understand that the total time that you're in bed, sleep latency, how many times you wake up, the quality of your perceived sleep, the whole circadian rhythm, the whole natural biorhythm of it, all of these 9 characteristics are your focus, and they're very important, each one in and of itself, to query about. Let's talk a little bit about circadian sleep phases, because this is one of the easiest ones that you can actually work with and actually help a patient to correct. And they're part of the secondary insomnia patterns. So you have a sleep that's delayed and you have a sleep that's advanced. So typically, like with adolescents, when they go to bed, they tend to go to bed later than earlier, and if it's an advanced phase, they tend to go to bed too early. So your older folks tend to have advanced, and your younger folks tend to have delayed sleep phases. And so there are techniques that you can use with one of these. And a little note that I made down here where it talks about that there's a discrepancy between the body wants to sleep and what society expects. When working with people who have these circadian issues, it's important to recognize that there are social demands and work demands on this particular circadian sleep phase disturbance. And so it's nice to be able to have the person begin to understand how sometimes the pressures that are brought to bear either in the workplace or basically within their social life sometimes need to be adjusted if their health is being at risk. So the thing about a circadian sleep pattern disturbance is that people are usually sleeping enough hours. They might be sleeping anywhere from 7 to 8 hours a day, but it's just when they go to sleep that becomes disturbing and can cause them difficulty. Another way to examine what's going on with the patient in terms of sleep is to use what's called the Epworth Sleepiness Scale. It can be downloaded from Medscape. It's a very easy tool. It's not complicated, and it is a quantitative tool, and it allows you to identify sleep duration and sleep quality. So there may be advanced or sleep behavior where the sleep duration is actually adequate. But if a person isn't sure about how many number of hours they're sleeping, this helps to evaluate how they're performing during the day. And so this is sort of like a super sleeper questionnaire where people literally are dozing off during the day. They're feeling an uncontrollable urge to take a nap. They find themselves really dozing off while they are behind the wheel in the car. So this is an excellent way to balance off on a more objective level whether a patient is really sleeping deeply and sleeping in a rough manner. So again, for those individuals who may be sleeping adequate numbers of hours, the quality of their sleep may not be sufficient. And this is a very simple way to be able to get them to determine how their performance is during the daytime relative to sleep. This is another tool you can use in terms of determining circadian pattern issues and whether the quality of sleep is really adequate, and also raising the consciousness of an individual. You can download this again off of the government website. The website is listed below, but it allows a patient to really keep their own diary about how many hours they sleep, and it allows them to identify in a very strong quantitative level what's going on so you really get your hands around sleep patients. So let's talk a moment about the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the whole stress response, and sleep profiles. So you have this sort of disruption of normal sleep patterns hinged upon by work, by social interests, by economic demands, and just life, causing issues. And then you have the impact of sleep mood. And it's a reciprocal relationship because stress can trigger moodiness, depression, as well as anxiety, which will impact your sleep performance and your sleep behavior. And likewise, just circadian disruption can then produce altered stress responses, which will in turn be the primary cause of your mood. So it's very difficult at times when a person presents with sleep to know which is really the major trigger. But you have insomnia and you have hypersomnia. And the insomniac is the person who has basically difficulty falling asleep and wakes up, can't fall back to sleep, etc. But the person who has hypersomnia, or we can call them a super sleeper, typically sleeps more than 9 hours a night. Sometimes seasonal affective disorder falls into the hypersomnia category. But the sad phenomenon basically occurs during the winter and in oftentimes northern climates where there isn't much sunlight. So it's more seasonal, not 24/7 and 12 months out of the year. But what you're looking at underneath the two sleep patterns is two different ways of understanding depression. And if I can just give you the takeaway as you just go through the different patterns of depression, the dysthymic or mild to moderate depressed person and also the major depressed person will oftentimes have primary alterations in serotonin and neurotransmitters, but serotonin is one of the more dominant expressions, serotonin imbalance. But the atypical depression seems to respond more to stimulants. It's more where you're looking at dopamine agonists and norepinephrine modulators. And so you're looking more at supporting and balancing the excitatory neurotransmitter side of the equation. So when you're thinking about working with natural strategies for both sleeping too little and sleeping too much that may be related or may not be related to depressed moods, when you think about these strategies, you begin to line up your natural products on the side of, for insomnia, things that calm you down, and for hypersomnia, things that are mildly stimulating, but in both situations, you're going to be looking to restore balance in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So it's a slightly different type of approach than just working with your straight circadian phase issues. So let's look at the supplements with the understanding that you have a circadian phase disruption. You also have issues that are associated with depressed mood and also the alteration in the HPA axis due to stress triggers. And so in terms of your basic support for sleeplessness, and you're all familiar with melatonin, where's circadian disruption? One of the things that becomes pivotal as your first line of sleep support is melatonin. And we find that melatonin has multiple applications beyond just helping to reset your circadian clock. And we'll look at a little bit more about melatonin in a moment. Another novel ingredient is casein tryptic hydrolysate, which is a very tiny decapeptide of stringed amino acids that are naturally found in the milk protein casein, but the size is very small, and it is reduced inside to such a state that the induction of a milk allergy response is very, very unlikely. But the chemistry on the casein tryptic hydrolysate, and I'll call it CTH, is that it's a very natural benzodiazepine-like substance. And we'll again look at a little bit of the science. It's a GABA receptor modulator, and the studies have been very positive as a short-term intervention for managing anxiety related to just being stressed out. So people who are living very stressed lifestyles oftentimes will benefit to just this sort of relaxing substance from milk. And passion flower extract has been around for a long time as a major anti-anxiety, sleep-inducing herb. Again, the key to passion flower is that passion flower needs to be given in a significant enough dose to really allow it to become neuroactive. Things that you're familiar with that will push a person into thinking about melatonin, passion CHT, are things like shift work, jet lag, and lifestyle choices that keep you burning the candle at both ends, disturb your natural circadian pattern, because this is simply the way you live your life, and you have to keep your ends being met economically. So you're stuck. Other things that you want to think about are aging. Aging will naturally throw off your link to the world around you and your natural circadian pattern. So melatonin is something that has been studied lately, and just to review quickly, you're looking at its impact on improving REM sleep, improving ADHD and sleep hygiene with that group of children, depression in adolescents and children, and just its benefit in major neuroregeneration. The dosages for melatonin vary from as low as 300 micrograms, which is a physiological dose, to as much as 5 milligrams, and this would be in the realm of the script recommendations. And melatonin does and has shown side effects when you begin giving it at levels of 8 milligrams and above. One of the things that is noteworthy is that if you are working with older individuals, less is more. And so 300 microgram starting dose or 500 microgram starting dose might be a valuable way to start, and you use the product 30 minutes to 1 hour prior to bedtime and give it a few days to click in. But in general, it's a very strong, very positive and predictable intervention. In terms of like the REM, non-REM imbalances, the rapid eye movement to non-REM imbalances that occur, one of the things you see as people age is that their REM frequency diminishes, and they spend less time in deep sleep, and they sleep very lightly. And melatonin progressively diminishes with age. So this is one of the very powerful reasons to use melatonin in an elderly person, because of its positive impact on improving REM frequency, and that REM frequency diminishes with aging. Some safety tips on melatonin: it is generally regarded as safe, and again, the risks are mild. If you take too much, what you'll get is dizziness, headaches, that kind of thing, some digestive upsets, and it shouldn't be used during pregnancy. Flower extract is another interesting herb, as I mentioned a moment ago, but I think these two more recent articles help you to appreciate the advantages of passion flower from a more modern perspective. Now, this little box here is giving you some dose recommendations. 3 to 6 grams of passion flower as a loose tea would be the amount you would need to be drinking to get a very strong sedative action. So if you're thinking about a loose tea approach, passion flower, 1.5 teaspoons of loose tea or loose passion flower leaf tea, steeped in 1 cup of water would be, or a boiling cup of water, would be the equivalent of about 1.5 grams. So in other words, 2 cups of tea a day, steep for around 10 to 15 minutes, give you 3 grams of the passion flower. And you're looking at between 2 to 4 cups of strongly steeped passion flower to produce a sudorific and relaxing effect. When you are using a botanical extract in a tablet, you would be looking at the equivalency. So you would to determine whether or not the amount of passion flower extract that's in the tablet would give you an equivalency of crude passion flower leaf around the level of 3 grams minimum. How you do that calculation is you would look at the extract strength. So typically an extract will say passion flower 3 or 5 to 1, and then it will give you the number of milligrams. of that extract. I'm sorry I have the slide. I should have actually created the slide for you on here to do that. So you can visualize the description of an extract, and when you look at your next product that you dispense, just look at how much passion flower is in there, the number of milligrams. Look at the concentration ratio, which will be either 5 to 1, 2 to 1, 10 to 1, and multiply the concentration ratio by the number of milligrams. So for example, if you have a 5 to 1 extract and 100 milligrams of a 5 to 1 extract of passion flower, that would be equivalent to 500 milligrams of crude, loose leaf passion flower herb, 500 milligrams. In this situation, considerably less than 3 grams. And so you do the calculation, and it gives you a sense of how much passion flower there is in a product. Passion flower is expensive. It's given as an extract at a very strong dose. So sometimes when you read labels, you'll see mixtures of plant extracts or just plant powders, so that it has the look and feel of being diverse and giving you an ample number of botanicals, but oftentimes the concentration and the density of any one of those herbs is insufficient to really produce sleep. So to get really good efficacy from plants, you have to begin to understand how much you need of the crude plant and whether or not the product is applying some level, some reasonable level of what you would take if you were actually using it as a tea. This slide moves to another approach to managing all sorts of circadian disruptions with sleep, and it brings in the element of the stress response as that imposes itself upon, your basic normal sleep rhythm and the inability to fall asleep. Some of you may be familiar with this particular formula. It's a traditional Chinese formula, and its basis is Rehmannia. Rehmannia is anti-inflammatory, and as I mentioned earlier, sleep is about producing an anti-inflammatory effect throughout the body and the brain. And Rehmannia as an herb is very anti-inflammatory. And this is a traditional mixture, and it's sometimes for those individuals who've been so disrupted in their circadian pattern. They've been sleeping anywhere on the average of, 5 to 6 hours a night sleep for maybe the last 2 years, and they're pretty exhausted in terms of their reserves. But in reality, they need to be able to put themselves to sleep. This formula helps to restore some balance to the hypothalamic pituitary axis. This web that you're looking at here is really designed to point out the advantages of adaptogenic herbs, and so each point on the web is really telling you how adaptogenic herbs work. Almost all of them work on the HPA axis. They balance the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, calming down the body's response to stressors. But in this particular adaptogen, the emphasis would be not only on balance, it would be also on calming a hyperactive stress response, with a very strong emphasis on balancing blood sugar, calming the heart, and improving mood. So for people who have trouble falling asleep and are wired to really get into bed and relax to fall asleep, often people who do a lot of binge eating, this is a pretty outstanding formula. It's called Serenogen. This is the traditional Chinese name. It's been around for a long time. And when you are thinking about mixtures, it's nice to be able to rely on a long traditional use. And clearly, having an herb in circulation since 1279 is a fairly good testament to its efficacy, and it has obviously been around for a while. It's also for sweats and fevers and hot flashes that are associated with exhaustion, including menopause. And this is more information on Rehmannia, which is the chief herb in the formula, and the reason I'm emphasizing it is because what you're looking at here is its now known effect as an anti-inflammatory, and as you go down further, when you look at its work in humans, you'll see that it's a very strong hypoglycemic. It's used in diabetes. Another very interesting adaptogenic approach, which is these are all adjunctive to melatonin, and definitely will enhance the bigger picture of why the person is having difficulty sleeping, is a polygala combination. This is called, but again, it's different in its application as an adaptogen when you look at it in comparison to Serenogen. And looking at here is a very different mixture of plants that are much more focused on neurologic calming. And so it's for those people who worry themselves sick and who lie around in bed and they can't fall asleep. And oftentimes things bug them, whether they're big or small or even real. It's just that they're so wound up mentally that they can't quiet their mind. If you compare this to, for example, to Serenogen, the stressed and wired, those individuals are mostly having problems going to sleep because they're physically fatigued and they're wound up and their whole nervous system is agitated. But it's more in relationship to calming the body down and taking out the heat throughout the body. And Serenogen calms the heart and it calms the mind. Whereas one, if you look at the way the rock of it is, the just general the picture of how it's different, you'll see it's much more focused on mood, muscle relaxation, and insomnia, not as much at all on blood sugar or cardiovascular. It's the nature of the different herbs in the formula. What's in the formula, it's a decoction like the Serenogen is a decoction, with the chief herb being polygala, and new research on the chief herb, or the polygala as they call it, is that it's a glutamate antagonist. And so they're seeing that the reason it seems to have such a profound effect on the mind and on a brain that's overactive and can't calm down has something to do with this herb's impact on glutamate. So what we're looking at there was a combination of using a melatonin formula with the casein tryptic hydrolysate and the passion flower, which is called Benasom, which would be excellent for filling up melatonin deficits or helping to reset the circadian clock in adolescence and in hyperactivity of both adults and children, and the whole process of aging, and that jet lag, things where people are out of sync with the normal rhythm of the earth and they need to reset their clock. And then thinking about choosing between Serenogen and TranQ as an example of working on the larger body, the constitutional well-being of the person, and helping to balance the HPA axis and the response to stress. So it's another way of approaching the circadian problem, looking also at how run down the person is, and if that state of being run down is affecting more their cardiovascular system or more their brain. So let's look at support for insomnia and hypersomnia. And here you're looking at ingredients that are frequently used for both HTP, theanine, folic acid, B12, 6. Let's look at 5-hydroxytryptophan for a moment. Hydroxytryptophan has been around for a very, very long time. We know that it's a precursor to serotonin and has excellent results in terms of really managing depression. There's a tremendous amount of positive as well as a tremendous amount of not so positive or equivocal kinds of results with 5-HTP. Basically, what you're doing is you are trying in this particular ingredient to refine the application of 5-HTP so that you're using it properly to promote sleep. And so 5-HTP has definitely been demonstrated to improve mood and to improve sleep. It has a great safety profile, and it's different than using tryptophan. It has, some different attributes. But one of the nice parts of 5-hydroxytryptophan is that it's not as subject to going down a pro-inflammatory pathway as tryptophan is. The typical dose is between 100 to 200 milligrams before you go to sleep, an hour before you go to sleep, if you're using it as a sleep aid. However, if, in fact, the person shows signs of depression and you're concerned about whether or not the stress response is also elevated and there may be too much circulating cortisol, 5-HTP as a sleep inducer and mood enhancer would be given in the morning and the afternoon and not before bed. You could then alternate, for example, 5-HTP as a precursor to serotonin, and serotonin ultimately transforms to melatonin, and then before bed you could also use your melatonin. You could alternate between the 5-HTP formula and melatonin as a way of balancing out circadian processes. I think what's important to remember when we're dealing with 5-HTP is that 5-HTP has been demonstrated to increase REM, and also melatonin has been demonstrated to increase REM. And when you're looking at sleep disorders and mood disorders, there seems to be, in the mood disorder area, a tendency for some depression to be associated with elevated REM sleep. That being said, if any of you have ever recommended melatonin to somebody who was depressed and it made them worse, and you were working with melatonin in the realm of psychiatric issues, it could aggravate REM, and increasing REM could make depression worse in a subset of individuals. Likewise, if you give 5-HTP in the evening, the 5-HTP can increase REM ever slightly, and actually it can increase cortisol ever so slightly as well. And so what happens is you could be exacerbating a previous PM cortisol elevation. So that's one of the reasons why, if there's depression and sleeplessness and you're trying to encourage enhanced serotonin synthesis and you don't want to interfere with sleep, giving 5-HTP would be a very valuable thing to do, but perhaps in the daytime and afternoon. And regarding melatonin, melatonin is simply tricky in depression. It's obvious that melatonin is very useful in resetting a circadian clock, but where depression is concerned, because of its impact on REM, you can have variable results. So Dr. Lombard has a few tips to think about when you are looking at using 5-HTP, and here they are. Basically thinking about using the 5-HTP in the morning and afternoon. Again, this is just a quick review of tryptophan, how tryptophan moves through all the way to make melatonin. So if you have a deficit in tryptophan diet, clearly if you're a vegetarian or you are really limiting your animal products so you're not eating properly, then foods like chicken and meat and pork that provide neurotransmitter precursors like tryptophan and phenylalanine, then you're looking at deprivations in both serotonin and dopamine. Tryptophan may be important to supplement independent of 5-HTP. This is the difference between 5-HTP and tryptophan. What you'll see over here is tryptophan can go to serotonin and then to melatonin, and if you enter here, 5-HTP will go to serotonin and melatonin, whereas tryptophan can be acted upon by inflammatory messages like TNF-alpha, IL-4, interferon gamma, and shunt tryptophan down the IDO to the quinolinic pathway, and quinolinic acid activates the NMDA receptor, glutamate pathway, and excites the brain and keeps you awake, which is one of the reasons why using something like the TranQ with the Polygula for those kinds of sleep disorders that may be related to excitatory transmission being upregulated in the brain can be very beneficial. But again, when you look at inflammation, you step back and you check the person's lifestyle out, you look to see what the pro-inflammatory triggers on, and many times detoxification or inflammatory medical foods, anti-inflammatory medical foods like using UltraClear or Ultra-Inflamex can be unbelievably invaluable for removing a lot of the inflammatory messages, setting the patient up to be much more receptive to things like 5-HTP. Like our 5-HTP formula is called somnolin, and so when you're thinking about you sleep aid and you see a lot of inflammation and a lot of pain as being contributors to the disorder, then it's important to step back and think about medical foods. Now, this is another approach to dealing with sleeplessness. If you feel that 5-HTP and melatonin are too excitatory with regard to the REM cycle and to cortisol, then you can always use a mixture that contains things extremely relaxing and rejuvenating. And so you can focus on like the casein tryptic hydrolysate and the theanine and the DHA, all of which are very neutral and very GABA focused, where a person is not sleeping well and you're having some concern about PM cortisol and REM density, and this is called Lumina. And so in that vein, Lumina can be very useful where 5-HTP and melatonin might be contraindicated. And again, situations in which you would be looking at Lumina is where there is a lot of overlap between emotional disorder and sleep disturbance. And, you know, because of the overall picture, clinical picture, it becomes difficult to ascertain what's happening with those two pathways. And so this is a very powerful and very easy way to enter in safely, gently, and calmly, and calm the nervous system down. So when we talk about hypo-HPA function, we're also talking about the person who is the hypersomniac. So by stimulating the HPA axis and by the HPA axis at the same time, you are able to help people be more awake and more present during the day. So there are strategies for dealing with the hypo-HPA mood profile that also link to perhaps a possible corrective measure for hyposomnia. And so ingredients that work to both improve HPA axis hypofunction and also improve sleep quality would be things like ginseng extract and rhodiola, huperzine A, and zinc status becomes extremely important. So when you think about a person who is sleeping too much, who has hypersomnia, think about working them during the day with adaptogens like Exhilarine, herbs that increase cholinergic activity, that wake you up, that make you more present. You wouldn't be using this at night before you go to bed, but you would be using this to allow a person to reset their hypothalamic pituitary adrenal clock, and you would be balancing the HPA axis, you'd be restoring it, but you'd also be stimulating cognition, improving mood and immunity, and just basically giving an uplifting effect. And this is attributed to herbs like ashwagandha and bacopa, which are actually choline-enhancing neurotransmitters. So in a person that sleeps too many hours, there's this whole other side of their profile where their mood is depressed because their adrenals may be depressed. And that influences their awakeness and their ability to sleep. And so their whole relationship to the world is blunted. So by giving them those adaptogens that actually enhance activity, you actually improve their functionality during the day, and that allows them to sleep better and in a more normal way at night. So just to review, you have HPA over-responsiveness, you have HPA under-responsiveness, and concomitant sleep patterns that are associated with this. So you have the hypersomniac who tends to respond to melatonin to increase REM density, which can be very helpful. 5-HTP may produce variable results, but should be considered if the person is depressed, and you can give it during the day. And you could even give it in the evening if there was a flat cortisol, because it does have a mildly cortisol-stimulating effect. And then you want to influence excitatory neurotransmitters that help to balance the HPA axis as well, and that falls in the realm of considering Adricet or ashwagandha, bacopa, which is Exhilarine. And then in terms of having a calming effect, you would be working in the realm of melatonin, definitely to reset the circadian clock, as well as dealing with possible products such as Serenogen and Tranq. We come to lifestyle medicine, because we're coming to the end of our talk. You always want to consider good sleep hygiene, and what you're looking at here are 10 things that absolutely are important in achieving healthy sleep. And you can receive a PDF, a handout for your patients that can be sent to you if you request it after the meeting is over, that you can give to the patients to identify a lot of these sleep hygiene tips. But some of the ones that are more notable are being sure that you give yourself at least 15 to 30 minutes to fall asleep at night. And by assuring the patient they don't have to fall asleep immediately, it can give them a sense of space. And they relax more about the process. And another thing that tends to be not talked about enough is sleeping on your side with a pillow between your legs. That also, and supporting your neck. That's another way to help your body relax and drift off to sleep, especially if you have low back pain. And sleep diaries are excellent because patients get a better sense of how they disrupt their own circadian patterns. And in terms of the first-line therapy program, the whole FLT program silences what we call the unholy quartet, which is the relationship between sleep, mood, food, and stressors, by emphasizing blood sugar management. We're also offering you an opportunity to provide your patients with an amazing stress relief guided imagery CD, which teaches belly breathing. And in a sense, diaphragmatic breathing and learning to breathe properly is the quickest way to turn off stress response and turn on the relaxation response. And it's suitable for use no matter what patient's health status is. So if you can't exercise, then this is one of the ways to produce sleep. This is one of the handouts that you're more than welcome to. Power napping, little light music, smart eating tips, all these really neat things that your patients can take advantage of by reading this handout. So I want to thank you for all of you participating. We got a little bit of a late start. We actually are ending on time. And if there are questions, I would be happy to take some now if any of you are still on the line.